Hello and welcome back to another tutorial. This tutorial is a response to a question from the community. In this tutorial, we're going to go through a simple process of developing, first of all, a management command, and then we're going to action that through the command prompt. And then we're going to move forward slightly and create a cron job. And that's going to create a schedule for that action, that piece of code to run every day at a certain time. So the code for this, if you want to follow on step by step in this tutorial, is in the video description. The base code we'll see in a minute basically is a registration system which we developed some while back, which allows users to register a new account, and then from there an email is created. That email is sent back to the user with an activation link. Before the user can actually log into the system, they need to click on the activation link that they received in their email, and then that will then be sent back to the system, which will then go ahead and activate that user in the database. So the question that was asked is, well, how do we, for example, if the user completes the registration but doesn't then go ahead and click the validation email, then what we have is the user is still in the database, but the user will never be live because they've never activated themselves. So how can we make some sort of system to check to see after a certain amount of time if the new user has clicked on that activation email? So in this tutorial, what we're going to do is answer that question. We're going to learn a little bit more about what happens when that email is sent and how that activation works. And then we'll go ahead and, like I said, we'll make a management command, which will then look in the database to check to see if anyone has signed up but hasn't clicked on their activation link. And then after a certain amount of time, say 3 days, what we're going to do is just remove them from the database if they haven't clicked on that link, if they haven't activated their account. So like I said, first of all, we'll make a management command for that, and then we go ahead and we use and create a cron job. So that would automate that piece of code and set that to a certain time, every 3 days, every 4 days. The code we're using here is from the Building a Simple blog, I think part 8. There's a link in the description if you actually wanted to follow that. That tutorial series is fairly old, and I do mean to get around to actually update that soon. So this is the code that was going to be presented with, and I'm just going to go ahead and create a virtual environment for this. If you don't know how to do that, there's a video not too long ago on how to do that on Windows and Mac. Yep. Okay, so now we've got that. There is a requirement file here, so all we need to do is activate our virtual machine. So here I'm using Mac, so it's slightly different on Windows there. And then let's just go ahead now and pip install this. Okay, so you can see from the requirements file, we are using Django 3. It's kind of irrelevant. I just wanted to get this project started, and that would guarantee that the project will work okay. So let's just run server just to make sure it does actually work, and we'll have a look to see what we have. Right, so everything is working okay. So you can see from here we have this login system, registration system. So the idea is that let's just go ahead and see if we can log someone in, or just make a new account. It's kind of irrelevant at this point. We use that, and then we go ahead and we register this new user. Right, so at the moment it just says registration successful and activation email sent. So what happens here then, you can see that an activation email has been sent to this user. Now this is just a mock-up, so what we have here, if you go into the core settings, you can see that what we're doing here is we're sending the email to ourselves. So here, for example, our email backend is Django core mail backends console.email backend. So basically any email that's sent is just going to be sent to the console here so that we can test it while we're in development. So just a little recap here, right? So how is this actually generated? So again, a full example or the full explanation is in the video tutorial. Again, there's a link in the video description if you want to go through that. But just to give you a snapshot of what's going on here, if we go into the accounts here, what we have is a way of creating tokens. So we are utilizing from Django the password reset token generator, And you can go over to GitHub and have a look. I think I will have left a link in the description. You can go and see the code for this. And basically this is the kind of a default way of creating a password reset token using the Django tools. And what that does is it creates a token, and that basically has a timestamp which lasts for 3 days. So after 3 days, that token won't work. So that's the default setting. Now you can go ahead and change that. And again, let me just see if we can find that in the documentation. So in actual fact, just reading around, the password reset timeout, which I was referring to or thinking about, that's actually being removed as of 4.0, it looks like. So I'm not entirely sure what that's been replaced by, but let me know in the comments. But it's kind of irrelevant for this. So what I'm saying here is that essentially we're going to have, when the user creates an account, they're going to have 3 days. After 3 days, they aren't going to be able to utilize that token by default. So what you can do, if you haven't started doing so, this is 3.0, you can go into the code and you can see the password reset token generator. Here we have a function check token, and that's going to check the token to see, for example, if the timestamp is within the limit. And you can see that that is done, and it's suggesting here that the password reset timeout in days is something that we can set in the settings. Obviously we can do that with 3.0. Not entirely sure with 4.0 how that has changed. But of course, if you want to know, it's really simple, because all we need to do is go over to 4.0 and have a look at the changes. So where are we now? So 4.0, so we go up to the top here, and I'll leave these links in the video description so you can look to. So now we're actually in the Django code for tokens. So let's just see what's been changed. So we're looking for check token again, and you can see now in actual fact, the password the function that we can set now in the settings is password reset timeout. So it's essentially just been changed from password reset timeout days to password reset timeout. And there you can set the limit or the days in which the token is valid for. So hopefully that's given you some content, some interesting ideas on how to access the source and start to read it and start to see how you can keep up to date with the changes in Django. Right, let's get to the main event. Now, we've already created an account, but obviously we can't really use that because I don't want to wait 3 days now before I can then set up some code. So the first thing we're going to do is in accounts here, I'm going to create a new folder. I'm going to call this fixtures. I'm just going to build a fixture. And I'm going to build a fixture so that I can create a user and set the date in which they signed up. And that'll be a few days before the current date. That way I can better test my code, right? So let's go ahead and build this fixture. So we're going to create a new file. I'm going to call this user. If you don't know what fixtures are, basically this is a way of entering data into the database. Maybe at the start, when you create your project or recreate the project, you just go ahead and load fixtures into the database. So this is going to be a JSON file, and I'm just going to bring this in. So what I've done here is I've just looked at this database, and here I've got SQLite extension installed. So I can do this, right click, open the database. And then inside of here, I'm just going to look at the user table and have a look. So I can see everything now that is kind of needed in this database in terms of the fields. So you can see here there's something called isActive. So the idea here is that the user is sent that email, then they use that email to then go to back to our system, and then when they do that, this isActive then gets activated, so their account is actually activated. So if they don't click on that email, this isActive remains at 0, false. So what we want to do is we want to check the joined date, and if the join date is over, say 3 days, 4 days, whatever you want, and isActive is 0, then what we're going to do is just remove their account. So once we understand the logic, it's actually fairly simple to do because it's literally just a query. So let's go back into our fixture here. I'm just going to load a fixture, and it's just going to have 2 items. So here we've got the fixture. So you can see the format. I'm adding some fields here. Now notice here, this second user called, well, it doesn't matter, user 1. This user here, the join date was like a year ago, right? So isActive is false. So that means I know that when I register, when I add this user to a database, when I run the code that we're going to create to check the user if the user has been activated, then I know that this user should be removed. So we probably actually only need the one user, right? Okay, so this is the password. So you can't type in password in clear text here. So this is equivalent to the word password, I think it is. So you can't, like I said, just type in the password in clear text here. It has to be encrypted. So you can just type into Google Django password generator, and you'll find that Django provides the tools in order to create a password. I'm not going to show you here. It's out of scope at the moment, but you can generate passwords from the terminal. Right, so let's go ahead and load our fixture in. So we're going to use manage.py userfixtures.json. So I've already done that. I'm already a step ahead here. So go ahead, load a fixture. It will say loaded one fixture, and then you can go ahead into the database, back into the database. So right click. Remember, I'm using the SQLite extension here. That allows me to right click and open the database, show that table. And then what we should have is a new user. I think it's right here. It should be user one. Yes. And you can see that they are is active is 0. And then the date is way before. Right. So that corresponds then to this says so user one email. You can see everything is in place there. So that's our user. So what we need to do now is build a piece of code which is going to check the database. First of all, check the join date. Now, because when the user registers initially, even though before the email is sent, they are added to the database. So the join date will still be added as and when they actually initiated that registration, regardless of the email. So we're going to utilize that and the isActive component here to actually check to see if they have activated themselves within the time limit that we're going to set. Apologies if I keep repeating myself. Right, so with that in place, let's just drop that down. So now we're going to go ahead in accounts or wherever you want to do this. Let's create a new folder here. So we're going to call this management. And then inside of here, we're going to create a new folder called commands. And then inside of here, we're going to create a new command, a new file. Create a new command called usercheck.py. So this is a custom management command. If you're not familiar with this, this is going to allow us to run this command by using the manage.py, and then we're just going to type in the name of this file here, and that's then going to run the code within this module here. Right, so it's just basically making our own management command. So what we need to do here then is a few different things. So I'll just bring everything in, rather type stuff out to speed this process up, and you can pause. So we're going to bring in call command so that we can actually run commands or that. In actual fact, we don't need that. We don't need that in this case. So base command. So we're going to extend from base command, which is going to give us access to actually create a custom command. We're going to need the user database, and then potentially we're going to use time delta. That's going to give us the tools to start to kind of make calculations and perform actions on the time. Okay, so let's go ahead and build a command. So class command and then base commands. So extending from base command, def handle. Yeah, I don't want that. So let's go self args and then quarks. Of course, it does it for me. Okay, right. So with that in place, let's go ahead and set up the users. So first of all, then we need to just grab all the users from the database. So user dot objects dot filter and then is active. So we're just going to grab all the users from the table that is active equals false. So any user that isn't active. So that's going to return all the users that aren't currently active. Now that might not be optional. That behavior might not be suitable for your particular case. Maybe there are, in certain cases, you do actually want to disable users. So you potentially need to think of a way around that. Maybe you add a new flag in your database. So for example, if you were to ban a user, there's a banned option. so you know that that person is banned rather than using the disable the account option. Okay, so let's move on. Right, so now we grabbed all the users, and now what we need to do is just kind of loop through them all. So for X in users, let's do something. So what we're going to do is we're going to say start date equals, then we're going to grab the date. So X, we're going to go into that data, that individual item that's currently being looped through, the user. We're going to grab the date joined. So this is the name of the field in the table. If we go back into our table here, show table, here we go. So it was called date joined. So we're going to grab this data. That's the plan. So we're going to grab that data, date, and then grab that data. So that's the start date. So we now know when they initially registered. Right, so then let's go ahead and say the end date. So what we're going to do here is we're going to set the initial date they joined, and then we're going to plus 3 days or 4 days or how many ever days you want. And basically that's the maximum amount of time they have before they can no longer activate themselves. But obviously you need to be careful here, because remember that what I showed you earlier, that setting, you need to make sure that that setting matches this. Otherwise you end up with the problem of, for example, you allow the user 10 days to register once you sent the email, but the system will be set up for 4 days. So they'll get removed anyway, so they won't be able to activate themselves. So you need to be careful of that. So let's go into time delta. So we're going to use time delta here to add 3 days. So let's say days equals 3. Now here, what we're going to be doing is we're not going to be setting this up so after 3 days from the time. So if they signed up at 4 o'clock, we're not going to set this so that after 3 days at 4 o'clock, we're going to remove them. We're always going to do this like at the end of the day. So we're going to perform with these actions maybe in a time when your system isn't utilized as much. So maybe 2 or 3 in the morning, something like that. So we're setting 3 days. And then what we can do is, if we want to do, you could just test that by printing that off so you can see the start and the end date. I'm not going to do that in this case. Oh, actually, let's do that. Let's do it. Why not? So start date, and let's just do end date, right? So let's see this in action. Right, so we're going to run the command. So Python free manage.py user check, and that's going to then print off. It's not user object has no date. Oh, okay, sorry, date joined. That'd be why. So let's run the command again, and this time you can see that there are 2 users, in actual fact, that are not activated in our system. So we can double check that. You can see that there are 2 users that are not activated. One person we signed up initially, so you can see that that date is today as a recording, and you can see this is the one we added manually for our fixture, which is like 2 years ago. Right, so we now successfully grabbed the users, and we now know the start and the end date in which the time frame they're allowed to click on that email and activate themselves. So now we have that. All we need to do now is perform a little bit more magic, of course. So we're going to say that if the start date is less than the end date, then we're going to say user.objects. Now you can do this in many ways, of course. So user objects get pk, I say obviously, but you may not know, x.id. So we're going to grab the ID, and then what we're going to do then is just delete them. Okay. So after that, we'll just print off something. Let's just say just deleted, and then x.username. So that's going to grab the username. Remember, we're looping through each user, so for each loop, X will hold the information about that particular user. And there we go. Okay, so you may have noticed that that's not quite right so far, right? Because what we're doing here is saying the start date, so that's when they initially joined, and that should be less, if that's less than the end date. Now, it's always going to be less, because we're always going to calculate those 3 days from there. So that isn't going to be working. That's always going to be true, right? So what we need to do is we need to grab their end date and we need to check it against the current date. So what we want here is we want to check the end date. Now, if the end date is less than the current date, so what we need to do here is get the current date today. So let's go ahead and just bring that in. So from date time, let's import date. Okay, so let's just go ahead and just grab the current date. So let's say today equals date dot today. There we go. Right, so if the end date is less than today, so if it's the 1st of 20th of April, for example, and that's less than today, so if today is the 21st, then obviously this is run out. The end date is passed. So therefore, we need to run this piece of code and delete that user. So let's give this a go. So what we got here then is that the behavior we're expecting, we do have 2 users that are is active, 0, false. So this one has just been generated. So you can see that's going to be within the 3 days. However, this one was generated 2 years ago. Right, so let's go ahead and run the code again. And it says here that we've just deleted user 1. And that is this user right here. So if I go ahead and refresh this, go back in, we now have removed that user. So now we want to automate this. Now there are a number of ways of doing this. We could just set up cron ourselves. However, probably the most simplest way, if you're using a Linux machine, of course, is utilizing Django cron tab. Now I say the most simplest way, this is something that should be simpler than it is. If you are new to development and you haven't used cron before, it can take some reading in some cases if it doesn't work correctly the first time. If you are using, for example, Windows, then this isn't going to work by default. And this is why in this tutorial, we're going to take you through this component utilizing a Docker container. So what we're going to do is just Dockerize the Django project that we've just created or working with. And then we go ahead and we install Django cron tab. And we'll just make sure that this is consistent for everyone. As long as you've got Docker installed and follow this process, this should work whether you're running Windows, Linux, or Mac. If you haven't come across cron before, it is a command line utility essentially, and also known as, and I call it Cron Job. It is a job scheduler. So it allows us to schedule tasks to be performed at certain times. So let's go ahead and just pip install this regardless of what operating system we're using, right? There we go. Okay, so we've pip installed that. I'm just going ahead and pip freeze, just update my requirements file, because if we're going to utilize Docker, we're going to need to install this on our container. So Docker pip freeze requirements. So that just updates our requirements with cron tab. Okay, so when we go into requirements now, you can see that we should have Django cron tab. So let's go ahead. Obviously, you're going to need Docker here installed. If you haven't got it installed, just type in Docker desktop, download and install that for your operating system. If you are using Linux, just follow the cron tab instructions. You'll be able to set this up. So, right, let's create a new file. I'm going to call it, let's create a new file, Docker file. Okay, so that's our Docker file. I do also have the Docker extension here. I will probably utilize that shortly. So go over to your extensions here and just install Docker. That would create this Docker extension option. Right, so I've created this Docker file. So let's go ahead. I'm just going to copy and paste these lines in. So from Ubuntu, so we're going to pick Ubuntu latest. Obviously that isn't the slimmest version, but basically this is the image that we're going to utilize to build upon. And then we'll go ahead and we're going to need to install cron. So let's do that first. So we'll run apt-get update first and then install cron. So we can then create a log file to be used or to be able to use and run tail. That's going to help us with monitoring our cron jobs. We just bring that in. Okay, so next up, we can go ahead and set up a cron job straight away. And we do that just to clarify that everything is working. So that's the first thing we're going to do. So here, I'm just going to paste in here a cron tab. So here we're essentially just going to build our own cron job right here. So you can see we're using echo. Now we've got these 5 stars. So each star represents a quantity of time. So minute, hour, and then the third one's day, and then month, and then day of the week. So this is something you can look up when you want to start scheduling. But for example, if I wanted this to run every minute, which it will do by default, then I just leave it like this. If I wanted this to run, for example, at 1 o'clock, always run at 1 o'clock, then I would put a 1 here. And remember, that's the hour. So therefore, this cron job would run at 1 every day. If I wanted it to run hourly, then I could probably set the minute to 0. So whenever the minute in the clock is 0, then it's going to run. But like I said, by default, if we just leave it like this, it should run every minute. Now, a common question that I get asked is, well, how can we make it run every 5 seconds, every 10 seconds? Well, maybe that's not something you want to do with cron, and there are probably other ways of doing that. So typically here with a cron, you're going to be setting this every day, every couple of days, every month, setting up different tasks to run at those interval times. So finally then, what we do is that we'll run a command when the container starts up to run cron, and also then set up our logs. So with that set, let's just go ahead and test this out, right? So we're going to docker build and then use the T flag, and then we'll call this Django project. And then we need the dot at the end to refer to this directory. So that might take a couple of seconds to build. Now, if you are using a Mac and you do have or if you're using any other kind of proxy, it may not download the dependencies here. Or update correctly. So just be careful that you may need to turn that off in your operating system. So with that done, if you do have the Docker extension here, then you can go into this and you can see that we've just created this image here called Django project. If you are using the Docker dashboard, then you'll see that that has also been created right there in our images. So now we can go ahead and run this. So this is just going to be Docker run. So Docker run, and then dp, let's use the ports, 3000, and then the name Django project. Okay, so that should start a container. You can see here in our Docker extension, a container has started, and that's running on port 3000. Or if I right click and we'll just go ahead and attach this shell, that essentially that allows us to move into that project. And here I can run command lines now in the shell of that container. I can also right click and view the logs. So this is where we should now see hello world. So after a minute, because that's what we've set this up with, after 1 minute, it should print out hello world. And there we go. So I waited the second minute there, and you can see that it's now printed out hello world again. So this is definitely working. So now what we need to do is just integrate this with our Django project. So let's go ahead and just shut everything down. Whether you use the Docker desktop, I'm just going to shut it down like this. So remove this, and I'm just going to remove the image. Doesn't look like I can do it from here. So nope. So I'll just go into my dashboard, and I'll just remove the image here. There we go. Right, so let's just add this to the bottom. So we'll set the work directory, and we'll set that to /user/app. So that creates, if it doesn't exist, that's going to be the working directory where we're going to install or put Django. And then after that, let's go ahead and just add some environments here so that we can send directly to the terminal, the output. So we put that in place. And then we need to maybe, we're going to need to copy. We're going to need to copy the requirements text here over so we can install all the dependencies. So that's going to be .requirements .text, and then we want to copy that over to user app. That's our folder, remember, that we're going to work from, requirements.text. Okay, so we copy that across, and then what we want to do after that is then just run, we want to run pip install. So pip install, and then the requirements.text. So that should install all the requirements. So let's now build a Docker compose file. Every time, new file, Docker compose .yaml file. So in here, we're just going to build a very simple service. So that's version 3.8. So yeah, we're going to build a very simple service here, a web service. We're going to have a container name of, let's just call it Django, and then build. So here we're just going to set the context. So basically what we're saying is when we build, look for the build file, which is the Docker file here, which is obviously dictating the image that we're going to use and the settings, etc., that we have inside of the Docker file. And then next up, we can run a command. So let's just get this working. So we'll run Python manage.py, and then we'll run the server. So 0.0.0, 8000. There we go. Right, so in addition to that, what we're going to do is we're just going to use volumes. So we're going to copy everything from this volume here over to user/app on the container, and then we'll just open some ports up. So we're going to use the 8000 port. It can be in doubles. We're going to open up the 8000 port here so we can access the container and Django inside running. So what we don't want to do is copy across the event folder. So we can we'll create a new file here, a .docker ignore. So create a Docker ignore file, and we'll just type in vmv. So just ignore that folder. Okay, so let's just close everything down. I think we're ready to go. Right, so let's do the Docker compose. Let's say build. Okay, so /dot requirements text not found. Okay, so we can't find the requirements text. So let's just make sure that we have set that out correctly. Requirements. So it looks like we missed the slash there. Okay, so let's give that a go again. So Docker compose build. Okay, so this time our service web failed exit. Okay, so pip not found. So we need to install pip. Right, so let's do up here and apt get install pip. So we just need to install pip so we can use the Python package manager to actually pip install. So let's give that a go again. So you can see that is actually going to fail too. So the reason why that is, you saw from the output, sorry, I've cleared that now. There was an option where we had to enter yes or no. So where there are options like that, we can kind of force a yes answer by using the Y flag here. So the final line of code, and I apologize for not doing it straight away. I haven't scripted this at all. We needed the Y flag there, like I said, because there is an option for us to actually have to press yes when we're performing some of these different installs. So that's just like an automatic say yes to everything. Right, so with that in place, we're now ready to run this again. So let's just do this one more time. We'll go for a build. So everything will be successful this time. So once this is done, we'll see that we have a new image appear right here. So our image is ready to go, so we can go ahead and start the image. So just before we start, I was just looking through the files here and noticed that we are utilizing the Ubuntu image here. So that does have, I think, by default, Python, I think 3.9 as of recording, but that is obviously Python 3. So here, the command to actually run this server here in the Docker Compose file, we're going to need to type in Python 3. So let's just go ahead and just build that again. And then we just run up, and then that should start the server. So everything looks like it's working okay. Let's just double check. So just go over. So everything is now working from the Django container. Okay, so we already have Pip Install Django cron tab. So we just need to follow instructions here. So we're going to need to install or add it to the installed apps. So let's go ahead and do that. Remember, we are mirroring this project over to our container here. So whatever we change here will change the container too. So let's go back into, I think it's our core settings. So here we go up to the top here, and we just add, well, it looks like we've already added it, Django cron tab. So we'll add that in. Now, next thing that we need to do is, well, we need to add a new job, right? So what we're going to do is, well, we already know we've got a management command. So we're told here how to run a management command right here. So that's something we can add. So what we can do then is in our settings, we can add this cron job directly. So we'll just copy this here, and we go back to our settings. Let's go down to the bottom. I think I've already added this too. There we go. So I've already added this cron job in our settings. So this is run for every 5 minutes, but I'm just going to set that to a minute. And you can see that we're going to run this management command called user check. Now remember, our management command is in accounts management. It's called user check, so that matches up. It's going to run this command here. And remember, that's the command that's going to remove the item, remove the user, sorry, from the database if they haven't activated themselves after 3 days, for example. Right, so we're going to need a new user again. So let's just let's come out of here. Let's just go ahead and add a new user again. So we'll run Python 3 manage.py, and then we'll run our fixture again. So load data, and that's going to be the user fixture.json. Oh, user fixtures. Okay, so we've installed that user back again. So let's just double check. Remember, this is all being mirrored across to the container. So we'll open the database up and have a quick look at the user. Just add this over here. So we've added the new user back in. Remember, that was user 1, the date, and the is active is 0. So we know that's the case. So let's go back into either using this here or our Docker desktop. Let's just go ahead and start the container again. Okay, right, so everything is nicely running at this point. So we just need to simply wait now, potentially for this to run. So while we're waiting, let's go ahead and just attach a shell here. So remember, this is a shell that opens up inside of our container, so we can now perform actions within our container. So what we're going to need to do here then is just add our cron tab. So Python 3 manage.py, cron tab, and then add. Okay, so we've now added that task. So what we can now do is we can run show, see what's running, and then we can also use remove. And that's just have a look at the settings there in the Django cron tab Python package index. It just takes you through the basic setup there, but that's the most simplest way of setting this up. So hopefully after a minute, I can go ahead and just refresh this, and it should have removed the user. So while we're waiting, let's have a look using some of the commands. So cron tab, use the L flag here. So cron tab, the L flag, that's going to give you a list of all the different actions that are currently being set up. And you can see here our custom action here. Cron tab action has been set up here to run via manage.py. And you can see that we did set the other task inside of our Docker file as well, hello world. So now then, when we go back into our table, Let's take a look, and you can see already that the user has been removed. So the action has been performed. We no longer have user 1. That user has now been removed from the database. So hopefully that's gone towards answering the question that was originally set, how to perform that type of action. That's obviously one of many ways, and using Cron Tab there is just one of many options that are available. Hopefully that's given you some assistance, and I apologize, Docker's not for everyone, of course. Maybe you don't have Docker installed. It's definitely worth starting to think about utilizing it if you are going into this industry. It is a very popular tool if you haven't already started utilizing it. That did give us the opportunity, though, to ensure that it would work on anyone's machine, because obviously Docker is going to provide us a platform, a tool to avoid any OS interoperability issues when we're developing. And it's handy, obviously, showing you this type of approach, because it just means that whether you're using Mac, Windows, or Linux, it's going to work because we're all using the same component here, the same tool, a Docker container. Thank you very much for watching if you have got to the end. If you do have any other questions, I can't always promise that I will answer them, but it's well worth knowing and understanding the type of problems that you're having, because then that better allows me to understand what type of content maybe I need to develop. And in addition to that, it also gives me an idea of exactly where you are currently in your development, of your development, if you like. So I know what audience I have. I know kind of the level in which I potentially need to pitch the tutorials. So thank you very much again, and hope to see you in the next tutorial.